Morning, good morning. I have my Bible opened up to the book of Jeremiah. I hope you have yours with you this morning and can join me there. We'll hit a few chapters, ultimately end up in chapter 45 and take our lesson from there. While you're getting situated with that, we again want to echo what was said in the announcements and welcome all of you here, especially if you're visiting with us. We're glad you're here. We're glad you decided to come and worship with us today. Thank you for being here. It's our aim, it's our goal that the things we've done thus far and the things that we're going to talk about and continue to do, that they're encouraging to you and that they're edifying to you. And if something doesn't make sense, if something I say doesn't make sense, or you have a question about something we're doing after we're done, just ask. Stop somebody, tap them on the shoulder, just ask why we're doing that. That's what we're here for, to work with each other, to help each other get to heaven. Thank you for being here this morning. We've come to the point in the year where summer's coming to an end and school's getting ready to fire back up, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on where you are in life. If you've had the summer off and you're having to get back into a schedule, getting back into the swing of things as a student or as a professional, maybe not a good thing. But for those parents who are expecting some quiet time around the house now, maybe it's a really good time for you. And transitional periods can be good times. They give us an opportunity to take stock, to look at our lives, to make sure we're doing the things that we need to be doing. And for those of us whose lives are relatively unchanged by the educational system, it's never a bad time to do the same thing. We can always reevaluate, take stock, look at our lives, make sure that the things that we're doing line up with what we know we should be doing. And this morning I want to talk about some things that are going to challenge you to do just that. Being the good Bible students I know that you are, you understand that not everything we find in Scripture is joyful and encouraging and uplifting. Sure, there's a lot of joy and hope found in the Bible. We find God's grace. We find His mercy. We find the hope of salvation if we give our lives to Him. And those are good things, and they make us happy, and they bring us joy. But right alongside them, we find warnings and condemnations for those that don't obey and for those that don't love God. And I think those are given to us for a reason as well. I think we have them so that we can read them, we can study them, we can learn from them, and then we can do better in our lives. So this morning, I can't promise the lesson is going to be one full of joy and hope. Like I said, it's going to challenge, at least it challenged me as I was preparing these things and getting ready to talk about these things. It brought out some stuff in my life that I need to work on, some things that I needed to reevaluate. But again, I think that's why God gave these to us. In the Lord of the Rings series, the Fellowship of the Rings, which I'm going to assume all of you have at least read or seen, being it's one of the greatest series of all times. You remember back when, at the beginning, Frodo, he has the ring, and Gandalf comes and talks to him, and he's telling him about the history of the ring. He's telling him about the story of the ring. And he's telling him of this shadow and this darkness that's taking shape, that's forming, and that's growing again. These are some dark times, evil times, and Frodo's found himself right in the middle of all of it. And he says, I wish it need not have happened in my time. Who can relate to that? Who's ever been there? Who wants to live in difficult times? When things aren't going well, when things aren't easy, when the world seems to be collapsing around you, who wants to live during those times? We want peaceful and easygoing times, right? Listen to what Gandalf says. Gandalf says, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And already, Frodo, our time is beginning to look black." Great quote, timely quote. It's not always going to be easy. But there's not a lot me and you can do about that. All we can do is make the most of where we have and where we're at in our life. Well, the book of Jeremiah is kind of one of those times. As you read through it, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the book of Jeremiah. We call him the weeping prophet, right? A lot of the stuff that he has to say, it's not good things. It's destruction, it's desolation, it's captivity, it's judgment from God. It's not a lot of pleasant stuff as we go through the book. And the man that has a front row seat to all of it is a guy named Baruch. And I don't know if that's how you say his name, but as I was preparing for this, that's what I came up with. So we're going to go with that, and I'm just going to have to be right. Baruch actually wrote the book of Jeremiah. As Jeremiah prophesied, as God revealed things to Jeremiah, Baruch wrote them down at Jeremiah's dictation. He was his personal scribe. This was his job. This was what he was supposed to do, to record these things for Jeremiah. And he's an interesting guy. He's got a whole chapter. He's got a whole chapter. It's only 5 verses, but a whole chapter in the book of Jeremiah where it's God just talking straight to him. And that's interesting. You've got this whole book of prophecies of God talking about world powers and nations and kings and his people and his judgments. And then in the middle, he stops and he talks to one guy. That's unique. Now, before we get into chapter 45 and look at that, I think it'll be helpful if we just talk for a minute on who Baruch actually is. We're not given a whole lot of details about him, but we have enough to paint a picture. Obviously, being that he's a scribe, he's someone that's educated, he's someone that's literate. And I don't think literacy was as widespread in ancient Israel as it is today. So that would be something that set him apart. His family was one of prominence. We can read where his grandfather was a governor under King Josiah, and his brother was a high official for King Zedekiah. So this would have been, again, something that set him apart. We learn that he's a trusted friend of Jeremiah. In chapter 32, Jeremiah buys this piece of land, this plot of land, and he entrusts Baruch to handle all the money and all the business dealings, and handle all the paperwork for him. A little bit later in chapter 36, he has a prophecy. Jeremiah has a prophecy from God, and of course Baruch records it for him. But this time, Jeremiah sends Baruch to the temple, sends him to the children of Israel to read what God revealed, because Jeremiah had been banned from going to the temple. And Baruch does it. And again, this shows his education, his literacy, his ability to be able to talk to people, to have their respect, to have their attention, to be able to share with them what God wanted them to know. He had a lot of good things going for him. But again, he was living in a tough time, delivering a tough message. In fact, in chapter 36, when he reads this scroll to the people, some of the king's officials hear what he says and says, we're going to have to report this to the king. We're going to have to go tell the king about this. And they tell him he needs to watch out for himself. And they were right, because when they went and told the king and reported it to him and read him the scroll, it says that he cut it up into pieces and he actually burned the word of God. And it says after he was done with that, he sent for Baruch and Jeremiah because he wanted to have them killed. He didn't like what God had to say. But it says God hid them. And then at the end of chapter 36, it's really that chapter 45 takes place. We have it a little bit later in our Bibles. It's kind of like a flashback for us. But again, it's God talking to Baruch. And apparently after all that had happened in chapter 36, Baruch was a little bit upset. He didn't like how things were going, and he levied some complaints. And it said the Lord took notice of what he said. Look at verse 3. The Lord says, Baruch, I have heard you say, woe is me, for the Lord has added sorrow to my pain. I am weary with my groaning, and I find no rest. Again, have we ever had that attitude? Just poor, pitiful me. I've got all these things going on in my life. Got all this stuff happening, and then the car breaks, or the stove goes out, or I get a bad report from the doctor, or a family member gets diagnosed with something. It's easy to get into this mindset when all the things of the world are continually pressing in on us. Verse 4, not only does God hear his complaint, but he responds. He says, what I built up, I'm tearing down. What I've planted, I'm plucking up. God's saying nothing's permanent. Things aren't great. And look, they're not going to get better, but I'm in control. God's telling Baruch that he's in control. Then verse 5. Verse 5 is what we've been working towards this morning. God says to Baruch, and do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not. Seek them not. Can I translate that for you in the Southeast Texas version? God's saying, Baruch, your ambition's getting in the way of serving me. Your ambition is getting in the way of serving me. What a wake-up call, right? This guy was just called out straight from heaven. God just called him out and put him on the spot. You think that was humbling? Again, Baruch was an important person. He had a lot of things going good for him. He was a respected person from a powerful and a respected family. And I'm sure he did have ambitions of being someone or being in a position of power. We could argue that he was well on his way. Just in chapter 36, he was God's spokesperson to the people of Israel. He's what we would probably call today a mover and a shaker. But God didn't see it that way. God said all that stuff, all those things of the world, it's getting in the way of serving me, of doing what's truly important in your life. So what about you? What about you? What if you had a message from God? What if you had your own chapter in the Bible where God was talking to you? Would it read like Baruch's? Would God say, quit seeking these things in your life because they're getting in the way of seeking me? What would your message look like? We read in Matthew to seek first the kingdom of God. That's the priority. All these other things, they just get in the way. Our ambitions, our goals in life, the things of the world that are right in front of us, they distract us. They get in the way of seeking God the way He wants us to. So with our time this morning, I want us to look at what seeking God looks like. God told Baruch, don't seek these things, seek me. What does that look like? I think a good place to start is defining what seeking is. Often when we think about seeking, we think about finding something that's lost, right? When kids play hide and go seek, or when we misplace something around the house, we go and look for it, we search for it, we try to find something, we seek it out. Jesus even tells several parables about seeking the lost. When something of value has gone astray, we look for it, we seek it out, right? And while all that's true and good, I think seeking God has a little bit different connotation. God isn't lost. We know where God is. Habakkuk 2, verse 20 says, God, the Lord, is in His holy temple. Let the earth keep silent before Him. If anyone's lost, if anyone is moved, it's us away from God. God hasn't moved. We know where God is. I think seeking God is more of a mindset than searching for something or looking for something that's lost. It's something that we strive for. It's something that we're always moving towards. 1 Chronicles 22. This is David. He's given instructions to Solomon and the children of Israel about getting ready to build the temple. And he says, set your mind and heart to seek the Lord your God. And then Colossians 3. If then you've been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things that are above, not on things that are on this earth. Again, lending to this idea of a mindset. And I think we could argue that maybe even a little bit more than a mindset, it's a lifestyle. Our lives are to be centered around this. This is what our life is for. This is, in fact, our purpose. This is why we are created. Jeff talked about this a little bit last week. Understanding that we exist to seek God is the beginning of how we seek God. We're not here to change the world. We're not here to amass fortunes or to please people. We're here to seek God. God is the beginning and the end. And until we set that in our hearts and until we set that in our minds, we're going to continue to let things get in the way of doing just that. Ecclesiastes 12. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. This is why we're here. Fear God, keep His commandments, seek Him. This is our duty. Eternity starts here. Now is when pleasing God begins. We seek Him, we come to know Him, we grow closer to Him, we become more like Jesus. Our hearts and our minds are transformed into His likeness. We're made for this. Sure, those other things may come about in our lives, but they have no value. They're of little importance if we're not completely and wholly seeking God. So how do we do it? How do we seek God? When we think about seeking God, I want to break it down into two categories. And the first is going to be intellectually. We have to choose to seek God. Plain and simple, it's a choice. Whether we decide to seek God or not is up to each one of us. We have to decide that for ourselves. No one can decide that for us. And that decision starts with the realization of our position. Because of our sin, because of our selfishness, we're dead in our trespasses. We have to see that, we have to know that, we have to know that without God, there is no hope. And if you can't get there, if you don't see that, if you don't believe that, then the rest of this is of little importance. Understanding your dependence on God is critical for seeking Him. If you don't know how bad you need something, you're never going to go after it. You're never going to seek it. So once we recognize our eternal lives depend on God, once we set that in our heart, we have a choice. And this is where being deliberate comes in. Being deliberate means that we consider something carefully. We weigh the options, we consider the outcomes. It's purposeful thought. And of course, having free will, we're able to decide on our own. We're able to be responsible for our choices, and being responsible means that we're able to choose our response, right? But being deliberate isn't enough for the intellectual part of seeking God. We can reason, we can consider the outcomes, we can be purposeful in our thoughts, we can have an understanding, and we can still choose wrong. That's how we sin, right? That's how Christians sin. We know the things that we're supposed to do. We know what we should be doing. We know what God expects, but we don't always do that, do we? So not only do we have to be deliberate, but that has to be fortified by being decisive. When we discern the right choice by looking at our position, by considering the outcomes, we then have to make the right choice. And that always isn't the easy thing to do. Our desires and our wants can often cloud the judgments that we've rightly discerned, thus sin. Brother D. Bowman wrote a book. It's called Be Wise Small. Fantastic book. It's a collection of his writings from throughout his life. Some really good stuff. I want to read a paragraph from the introduction of this book. He says it's actually rather simple. What you try to do is be wise even about the smallest matters. If you miss the trash can, you go and pick it up. Better still, if you notice someone else misses the trash can, you go and pick up their miss. You take the grocery cart to the proper place, even when it was someone else who left it out. And you do all of it while nobody's looking. I conclude that if you continue to be wise about even the smallest matters, you will soon develop a habit that when the time comes, you'll be wise about the large matters almost habitually. And so, be wise small. Having this mindset and this attitude builds up our decision-making muscles so that when we deliberate, we then decisively choose to seek God in all that we do. One other aspect of this intellectual part, I think, is the motivation to do these things. Paul says in Romans 11, consider the goodness and the severity of God. On those who fell, severity, but toward you, goodness, if you continue in his goodness. And while we can't set aside the severity of God, I think throughout the story of the Bible, we see God's goodness as the main motivator. Consider 1 John 4. By this is love perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment. And whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. We see the goodness of God. We see him in our lives. We see what he's done for us. And we see his love for us, and that should motivate us to seek him. Consider the parable of the hidden treasure in Matthew 13. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has to buy that field. He finds this great treasure. He wants it. He knows how important it is. He knows how valuable it is. So it says in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has to get it. He happily gives up everything he has, everything in his life to get this, because he knows how important it is. He knows how valuable it is. So it should be with us. If we seek God, it's because we deliberately and decisively choose to, and it's for nothing less than the joy that's found in the goodness of God. One final observation. Once we make up our minds that we're going to do this thing, we have to put it into action. When we're deliberate in our thoughts, decisive in our decisions, motivated by the goodness of God, all that's left is to diligently seek him. This is where the rubber meets the road, as it were. So what does it mean to diligently seek God? In his book, Diligently Seeking God, Gary Henry says, we must give ourselves to the quest for God with a priority and a passion that we don't invest in any other pursuit. That means nothing gets in the way of serving God. God told Baruch his ambition was getting in the way of seeking him. Baruch probably had high aspirations. He wanted to be someone. And God said, you're worrying too much about that. I've called you for greater things. Do we have things in our life that God would say are getting in the way of seeking him? It doesn't have to be lofty ambitions of power or prominence. I mean, it could be any number of things, and it's going to be different from person to person. But if we're honest with ourselves, I think we could probably pin something down pretty quick. Do we let our desires get in the way of seeking God? Briefly, I want to talk about that, how this looks in our lives. I chose a few ideas, things that we experience, things that we see each and every day, that if go unchecked, the Christian can fall into, and it can affect the way that we seek God. Remember at the beginning of the lesson, I told you this challenged me. And we've gotten to that point now. So here we go. Do we let our desire for money get in the way of serving God? We all have to work. We all have to job. We all have to have jobs. I get that. But at some point it moves from being a job to being your life. Now where that point is, well, that's between you and the Lord. But do we pursue jobs and careers and businesses to be able to make lots of money at the expense of seeking God? Are we able to spend quality time with our families? Or is our home just an extension of the office where we answer emails and field text messages and phone calls? Do we have time to spend with our brethren in the evenings or on the weekends? Or do we put in too many hours to be able to do that? What do you spend your free time thinking about, your quiet time thinking about? Things going on at work, a big sale, a big contract, troubles at the office? Or do you spend your quiet time thinking about God, meditating on His Scriptures, meditating on His Word, meditating on the things that He's done for us in our lives? Can you make it through an entire worship service without taking a work call or looking at a work text? Is something so important that you can't give God an hour to worship Him uninterrupted? I get emergencies, I get being on call, but that should be the exception, not the rule. Does the pursuit of money get in the way of seeking God for you? How about the way we appear to other people? Do we care so much about how others see us that it gets in the way of seeking God? And this can take many forms. Do we have to have the best and the most expensive things so others take notice, so others see us that way? Is that what drives us? Is that what motivates us in our lives? And I think this can fall into a couple different problem areas. First, do we sacrifice to be able to get these things? Do we, one, either work a whole lot, or two, kind of be selfish with the things that God's blessed us with and not help and not serve and not do to others because we want to keep all the things for ourselves so that we can live the lifestyle and have the things that we want in our lives? And then secondly, maybe you've been blessed greatly and you do a whole lot of good things and you meet a lot of needs and you take care of a lot of things and you take care of a lot of people, and that's great. But we have to keep ourselves in check on why we want these things in our lives. What's our attitude? By having the most and the expensive and the most luxurious things all the time, is that helping other Christians? When we talk about modesty from the pulpit or in the classrooms, the conversation typically turns to dress, how we look, how we appear in our clothing choices. But when the Bible talks about modesty, a lot of the time it's talking about modesty is about having nice things and expensive things and showing those things off to get the attention of other people. Matt Bassford wrote an article on this. He called it parking lot modesty. And he related this principle to the cars that we decide to drive and buy. And it stirred up a huge hornet's nest, rightly so. And I can get it to you if you want it. What drives us in that pursuit? What's our motivation for these things? Are they for serving God? Are they for serving self? To make us feel good about ourselves, to give ourselves a sense of accomplishment. So we can post pictures on Facebook about these extravagant vacations that we go on and these trips and these awesome pictures and this luxurious and opulent lifestyle that we live so that others can see us. And we feel good because others look at us and say, wow, they've got it made. They're doing really good. They've got all these things. I wish I could be like them. Is that what drives us? Because that's not what we find in the Scriptures. It's not what God tells us. God tells us other people should be looking at you and seeing Jesus in you, seeing God in you, and the way that you live and your example in your life should be showing Jesus and God. And that's why other people should look at you and say, hey, I want to be like them because they love God. This is important to them. Paul says, what? Be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Do we let the way that we appear to other people get in the way of seeking God? Lastly, do we let our desire for pleasure get in the way of seeking God? And this one's a bit more broad, but I want to focus in on how it manifests itself. Because no matter what it is, it can all manifest in the exact same way. It's how we see it in our life. And pleasure can be a lot of different things. For some, not me, it could be work. Some people enjoy that. But for a lot of us, I think it's doing things that we enjoy, taking vacations, taking trips, spending time with family, with friends. For some people, it could be sports. I know people I work with, they give their life to sports. They travel, practice every night, travel every weekend. Every extra hour and dollar goes to sports. And these may be extremes, and you may just simply get pleasure or enjoyment from sitting around the house and sitting on the couch and watching TV, watching a show, watching a game, taking a nap, whatever it is. We all have that thing in our life that gives us pleasure, that we seek for enjoyment. The point I want to make is how that looks in our life. Do we let these things take priority over seeking God? And one of the quickest tells, one of the quickest ways to know if that's the case, regardless of what it is, regardless of what your thing is that you do for pleasure, that you seek for your enjoyment, one of the quickest tells if we put that over things of God is that if we do those things when there's opportunities to be here worshiping God. And look, those things aren't bad. None of those things that we do, those aren't bad things when done with the right attitude. Can we take vacation? Sure we can take vacation. Sure we can take trips. Is there a sound church where you're going on vacation? Do you visit that church while you're on vacation? Think about the impact you'll have on those people. You show up, they see you come from out of town, they know you took time off work, they know you spent a lot of money to come here, and then you stop your trip, you stop your vacation, and go meet with the local saints because it's that important to you. Think that'll have an impact? Sure it will. They'll see that, they'll know that. Do we do that when we take vacation? Or do we take a vacation from God? Because who's really going to know? Do we even consider that when we plan our trips? Do we think about where we're going to worship or what we're going to do when we're on our trips? Or do we just say, oh, we'll figure it out along the way, or we can catch the live stream and go on about it? The issue is when we substitute one for the other. Being here, worshiping with each other, is a key indicator on where your priorities lie. There's a quote I've seen several times here lately floating around. It says, worshiping should be your excuse for missing everything else, not everything else the reason you miss worship. How true is that? Is that true for you? You miss services for games, for practices. How about a meeting with some organization you're affiliated with? Hanging out with friends, some form of entertainment, parties, get-togethers, whatever it is. When we miss for these things, we're just like Baruch, who let the things of the world get in the way of seeking God. Plain and simple, bare bones, being involved with our things, the things that give us pleasure, the things we do for pleasure, being involved with those things when we should be worshiping means we're putting more importance on the things of the world than the things of God. End of the story. And look, this doesn't just apply to Sunday morning. It's a Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. We should be here. Get on a soapbox right here. If you truly care about these things, if seeking God is truly important to you, if this is something that's important in your life will show it. In the bulletin, they started putting the numbers Sunday morning, Sunday night. If this is truly something that's important to you, those numbers would be the same. There wouldn't be a fall off. That means when we as a group of people, who've come together, who've decided we're going to worship and work together, we're going to work in God's business together, we're going to strive to help each other get to heaven, when we have decided as a group that we're going to do something, that we support it. That means when we have a gospel meeting, we support that gospel meeting. That means when we have some function or some get-together, that we've decided, hey, this is going to be good. This is going to be good for our spiritual walk with God, that we support that. That means when we schedule and plan and announce and talk about for months and months a congregational singing on a Friday night, that when that Friday night rolls around, we show up to that congregational singing. Were you here Friday night about a month ago? Maybe a quarter of our people supported that congregational singing. Is that an attitude that shows that we're diligently seeking God, that we actually care about these things? How about this week? Have you already put it in your schedule, in your calendar, to be here tonight, tomorrow night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, when the young men of the congregation are going to get up here and they're going to lead the prayers and lead the songs and read the scriptures and do the talks? Are you going to be here to support them? Because if you truly care about being a Christian, if you truly care about diligently seeking God, you're going to be here. Because that's what your lives look like when these things are important to you. Hebrews 11:6. Are you diligently seeking God in your lives? But without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he who comes to God must believe that He is, and that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. James tells us that if we draw near to God, God will draw near to us. We do that by diligently seeking Him. And here it says that He's a rewarder of those who do. That reward isn't great things. It's not great ambitions, the riches of the world. That reward is God Himself. That He will love us, that He will accept us, that He will bring us into His fold, that He will extend His grace to us, and that our hearts will be filled with the joy from being in His glory. That's why we diligently seek God. Well, at the end of chapter 45 in Jeremiah, God tells Baruch that He's going to bring disaster on everything in the world. He's going to bring disaster on everything around him, but He tells him He's going to give him his life as a prize. He's going to spare him, and that He's going to be with him. And God's done the same for us today. Never did God promise an easy road. Never did God promise an easy life to the Christian. In fact, He said just the opposite. He said it's going to be difficult. He said it's going to be difficult to live the life that I expect you to live. He said there's going to be trials, there's going to be temptations, the things of the world are going to come at you, difficulties are going to come at you, pleasure is going to come at you, all trying to pull you away from God. Has that happened to you this morning? Has the world lured you away from seeking God? Now's the time to do something about that. Now's the time to start being decisive in your decisions and diligently seek God. Can we help you with that this morning? If so, if you have any other need, the front is here while we stand and while we sing.